Apologies and changes in membership, if any.
We have apologies from Councillor Adams and Councillor Outlaw and Councillor Ellis, but we have substitute of Councillor Oliver today.
Welcome, Councillor Oliver. Minutes of the previous meeting. Is everyone happy that the representative of that meeting? It's Councillor Hendry proposed. That means you're going to have to second. Thank you very much. There we go. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Oliver and Councillor Hendry.
Yeah, Governor at St George's School, Newport.
I'm Chair of Governors at Holy Cross Catholic Primary School and a Governor at Queensgate Foundation Primary School.
Thank you very much. Public questions. We received 2. We do have one of the askers of the question in public gallery. If you'd like to ask your question for us, Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair. What update can the Cabinet Member for Children's Services provide on school place planning following the meeting with officers on the 2nd of December 2022 and the informal meeting of Cabinet on the 6th of December 2022, and what outcome arose from those meetings?
Thank you. Councillor Landry.
Thank you very much for your question. And the response to this is the outcome from the meetings highlighted were that officers were asked to bring forward a strategic place plan for the island schools. And this is scheduled for the 8th of June Cabinet and is on the Council's forward plan. And I can give you the written response, which actually has the link to the forward plan, but it is on the Council website where it is on for June, and it will be coming to Cabinet. Thank you.
Can I add that we have encouraged engagement from head teachers and from governors, and they stepped up and did engage. So I would press that we get a definitive answer and definitive action from that, because I don't want to have Mr. Richards to have to keep coming back and asking that question at further meetings. Thank you, Mr. Richards. The other question I will read out, lucky you, from Mr. Steve Cowley is, as a consequence of response PQ07/23 to my question at full council meeting to the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, the following question remains. Would this Policy and Scrutiny Committee ensure that the Council's legal department kindly provide copies of documents they relied upon to legally justify the disposal of the ex-school site at Yarmouth and provide financial reassurance to potential funders that these property rights are guarantees? Reasons for the questions. Yarmouth Town Council's Working Party is engaged in raising funds to save the ex-school site for the community's mutual benefit. We are actively seeking support from residential donors, existing trust funds, and encouraging bequests from generous patrons. Given the possible uncertainty that surrounds the legality and potential changes to the Council's decision to sell the site, unequivocal proof is paramount.
As you will appreciate, Chair, there is a complex response to this, but I will pass over to Steve Crocker now, who will take this up.
Well, the complexity is that I emailed Justin Thorne, who's the council's strategic head of legal services, and he's happy to make a response, but he does need to speak to the principal lawyer that is managing this case, who is on leave until Monday. So we'll make a further written response once we've consulted with the lawyer who's dealing with this particular issue. It would be unwise for me to.
No, I understand that, but do we envisage that the information requested will be available?
I can't. We've dealt with a number of FOIs already, so it depends on what's in here that hasn't already been released. So I don't. Sorry to obfuscate. I can't give you an absolutely straightforward answer to that. I need to further consult with the lawyer.
No, that's a fair answer. Thank you for that, Steve. Okay, moving on. Progress on outcomes and recommendations from the previous meeting. Any comments anyone who would like to make on the first item, the young carer support, because the strategy was circulated, I believe. So if there's anything to add or ask, Mel did circulate that. Other than that, it is just an update on where we are and where things have moved to due to other things taking their place. Anything to add? Any questions? No. Thank you very much. Okay, get on to the exciting bit. Item 6, Uncle Brian.
Thank you. It's the exciting bit because you don't know whether I'm going to be able to share the presentation or not. We did have a practice earlier on and I did manage to do that then, but is that there? Something there. On screen. Ah, fine. Brilliant. Okay. So I wanted to bring this item to you because it's a really significant item and it's one that I think the Policy and Scrutiny Committee really ought to be asking for an annual update. It's really important, I think, that we implement an SEN strategy and that members become heavily involved in scrutinising the progress against that, and you'll understand why as I kind of go through it. I've been working now for many months on putting together a bid for underneath the government's safety valve proposals, and all the indications are that we should be quietly optimistic that we will be successful in that. And the first part of that was the announcement of the free school today. And when you add all the proposals up, I suspect you're talking something like over £25 million worth of additional investment into the special needs system on the island. And that's really big news and really welcome. So it's some really hard work that lots of officers have been involved with. That will hopefully be brought to fruition. And I'll kind of talk through the strands of the proposals. The first thing I wanted to say was, because I think it's really important that people see the first quote on this. This is the outcome of our last Ofsted inspection around SEND on the island. So periodically Ofsted turn up with CQC and they do an inspection of the area, not the council, the area. And that's what they found. The state of SEN in 20, and it was one of the last inspections prior to COVID coming in. So I'm not expecting another inspection anytime soon, but it was just prior to COVID, and we came out really positively from that. So people were impressed with the way head teachers, council officers, health, social care, parents, carers were all working together to get better outcomes. The other bit that's really important is when Ofsted go back to visit places, a couple of indicators, they are key indicators they're really looking at. One is if a parent submits an EHCP, do they get it within 20 weeks? And I have to say, over the last couple of years, our indicator on that has been way above the national average, month after month after month after month. Your SEN team, and in February, I know we got 70% of our EHCPs out on time. The national average is about 58%. So we're doing really well as a team to get those out. And the other indicator they looked at are those children that are due to have a phase transfer from primary school to junior school. And by the 15th of February every year, we have to have amended the EHCP to talk about the type of school and preferably the exact school they will be going to. And I'm pleased to report we've done 100% of plans on time. In fact, we didn't even have to rush with a couple of hours to spare. We did it quite easily this year. And that's kind of unheard of in local authorities, exceptional performance. So you should be proud of the work that your SEN team have been doing. So in coming forward with the proposals, there's been lots of bits we've drawn upon. One is you'll be aware that the government consulted on the SEND system on a green paper last term. It was a green paper that was warmly welcomed, although we think it probably could have gone further in some regards, but it was welcomed. And they've published the response today, and I've read the response on my way over here. And thankfully, the constituent parts that were in the green paper that I've picking on later on in terms of the strategies are all in place. So we're still in line with the proposals from that. We've then got the safety valve, which basically is a mechanism where government allow you to spend over and above your high needs block allocation with a view to, if you can then have an in-year balanced budget by about 2027, they will write off your high needs block deficit. And we're bringing forward proposals to spend more money up front to improve early intervention, to create more special school places on the island, which should then reduce expenditure by 2027 to enable us to set a balanced budget. And for the island, that's going to be worth millions of pounds, that initiative. It's really welcome. And I'm very confident that we'll hopefully get that. We've also looked at all the data on the island. So we've looked at every single child with special educational needs. what sort of placement they're in at the moment, what sort of placement we think they should be in. We've looked at the trend of birth on the island, obviously, and the kind of demographic issues to make sure that we get exactly the right sort of places in the right sort of locality. I never pretend to have a monopoly of wisdom, so I've visited other local authorities, East Sussex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire. I've been up and down the country listening to their strategies as well, and which of those apply to the island. At the same time, the safety valve came in on the island. Hampshire got involved in a scheme called Delivering Better Value, and as part of that, the DFE appointed consultants, Newton Europe and SIPFA. And all the lessons I learned from that work, we've also cherry-picked the ideas that we think would be applicable to the island as well. I've also had the National DFE SEN advisor work through and check these, and they're saying they're good. So I'm feeling fairly confident that what I'm saying is got some support. So what we've got is some strategies that we've put together to improve outcomes. As soon as the Green Paper was published, I invited governors to come to a meeting where I went through those in detail. I invited head teachers to come to a meeting where I went through those in detail. We've had a subsequent meeting with head teachers. I've had 3 or 4 meetings now with parent carer voice on the island, and actually they've come forward with some really good suggestions that I've incorporated into these strategies as well. Really, please particularly pay credit to Joe Routledge from parent carer voice on the island. So the strategies also try and weld together the systems of parents, children, young people, all the different players to try and build a proper relationship, but also being mindful that anything we do has got to be cost effective to try and make sure we get a balanced budget. So some of the strategies, the main ethos of the Green Paper and the response today is that we need to support mainstream schools to ensure that children with special educational needs can thrive in a mainstream environment. That's the complete ethos of the Green Paper. It's really overriding thing. And already on the island, most of the children with special educational needs have their needs met in a mainstream school. Even the children with an EHCP, most of them attend mainstream schools, and that's right. So it's how we upskill the teachers and the learning support assistants to do an even better job with that cohort. So we've published some SEND support guidance, which is aimed at the children in mainstream. That's got tips and strategies that teachers can use in the classroom. It was co-constructed with professionals on the island and island parent carer voice. It's gone down well with head teachers, and they think the strategy in there are good. We're going to try and exemplify that in a toolkit to try and bring it alive to teachers so they can understand how those strategies look in practice. There will be, over the next few years, some bespoke training aimed at governors, head teachers, SENCOs. The government in the Green Paper announcement today have committed to providing a new SENCO qualification with additional training for them, teachers and support staff. And I hasten to say, it's not just schools. We're also talking about early years providers in this as well. The 5,000 qualifications for early years providers as well is in the response to the Green Paper today. Every single visit we do to schools, so whether you're a geography inspector, a maths inspector, when we're in there, we want you looking through the lens of a child with special educational needs to make sure the provision is doing what it needs to do. So all our visits will have a focus around SEN. We want to have set up termly meetings with the advice givers. So when a child or when a parent or a school applies for an EHCP, we have to ask for advice from educational psychologists, social care, health professionals. We think there's some training needs to be done with the advice givers so that the advice givers are giving really good advice, because that's what we base the EHCP upon. We're going to set up SENCO networks. So the school improvement team will have all the SENCOs able to attend a meeting on a termly basis where they will discuss the sort of strategies that you should be employing within a school to ensure that children get a good deal. We've also got the Educational Psychology Service, who are going to set up SENCO circles, which will be a softer opportunity where SENCOs can come along and say, I'm really worried about Dave in year 4. I've tried this and I've tried the other. Can we bounce around some ideas as a group of professionals to try and support each other to ensure that they can try something different? The educational psychology team on the island is first rate, and schools are able to purchase time from the educational psychologists. any child that applies for an EHCP automatically gets a full educational psychologist report, which is helpful to the school. You'll be aware that we've had recently 2 mental health support teams rolled out on the island that are supporting children in school, and we need to make sure that their work is aligned with this work. We've also got an outreach offer which is coordinated by Medina, but also supported by St George's and the other schools, when the schools all pay into that through a service level agreement, but it's high quality. We are about to appoint, through a procurement process, we're down to the last 2, an external consultancy company whose job will be to work with every school to look at the needs of the children they are educating, the skills of the staff team that are educating those children, and where they find the skills of the staff are not aligned to the needs of the children, they will recommend training programs to ensure that we upskill the teachers. It's a complicated piece of work, but again, aimed at improving the capacity. And then finally, we're going to set up on the island for the first time a Senko support line, which will be a telephone line staffed by experienced Senkos where people can ring up for advice as well. So there's a building capacity strand, and I hope you think that's quite a comprehensive list of strategies we've pulled together around that. The second bit is around the kind of annual review process for EHCPs. At the moment, the legislation says the local authority has to review the paperwork and we don't have to attend the annual reviews. And we think we can get better outcomes for children if we attend more of those annual reviews as local authority officers. So at the moment, typically it is the head teacher or the Senko plus the parents and the child. In future, we want local authority officers and other advice givers in there. So sometimes ed psych, sometimes people from health to get a bit more involvement in that. We want those to be really person-centred moving forward. So there'll be some training for Senkos, school staff and all those advice givers to make sure we get the very best annual reviews we can on the island moving forward. And what we're trying to do on that is to really focus on, so what are the outcomes we're really trying to achieve for this child, and therefore what is the provision that is needed to get them from where they are now to hit those outcomes. And we want it very specific, tied down and tight. They're pretty good, our EHCPs, but they could be even better, and we want to tie that down. And what we want to do each year then is to make sure the resource that goes in is right-sized to meet that journey of where they are to meet those needs. And underlying all of that, we do know that children eventually have to live in a mainstream society. So each year what we should be trying to do is to gain greater independence for children so they are able to live successful lives in a mainstream world. So building up each year greater independence. And we think that means at the annual reviews, sometimes we focus on what we're doing next year. When we're coming up to important transitions like the post-16 transition, there's a conversation probably to be had with 13, 14-year-olds. Where do you see yourself post-16 and how can we help you over the next 2, 3, 4 years achieve that? So having a longer term view as well. There's then some stuff about improving the process, about how we create an EHCP. So the government of Day have said all EHCPs will be electronic in future. We knew that was coming, so our EHCPs are now electronic. So we're one step ahead on that. They will be standardised though, and that will mean we'll have to standardise our EHCP when the government have done that next piece of work. The other bit they are going to do is they're going to publish national standards as to what all mainstream schools should be providing as ordinarily available provision before a child gets an EHCP. So that every mainstream head and every mainstream Senko is absolutely crystal clear what their expectations are and what they should be delivering as that ordinarily available provision. There's then something in the Green Paper's response about how they're going to right-size the financial envelope of money that goes to the school with bringing in a national banding system. Again, we saw that come in, so we stepped through the door and put in place a banding system on the island because we knew this was going to go national at some point. Big focus on making sure we get out to the annual reviews of those that are changing their phase from primary to secondary and post-16. And the other bit, I've got to speak warmly here of the Isle of Wight Council. I have to say I've been really well supported corporately by the Chief Exec, by the Chief Finance Officer, by Steve, Councillor Andre, and thank you for agreeing the budget last week because you actually gave another £270,000 to SEN case workers, and between now and 2027, that's about £1 million worth of investment you're investing in additional case workers. So huge thanks on that. We've then got a sufficiency strategy, and building on the good work we've done in recent years. So you'll know we've introduced resource provisions at Honeyhill, at Braden, at St Francis, at Medina College. We already had one at the Bay. We already had one at Carisbrooke College. So we've introduced more resource provisions. We invested about 800,000 in St George's School in the last couple of years to expand the number of places there. And prior to that, we've done some work with Medina House Special School Primary, where we used some of the building from the old Barton School site as well to bring into more places. So we increased the special school places and the resource provisions. We still think by 2025 we are going to be short of places. So I've met with the DFE on a weekly basis over the last 6 months, and I'm pleased to say that we can now say in the public domain that we will be getting a 75 place new special school on the island. There's lots of next steps involved in that, but we've got the money to do that. That will cater for primary and secondary aged pupils. The data is showing the need is mainly for year 5 and 6 primary schools, but we want to look at that data again before it gets built. We will build some additional resource provisions over the next period of time. And how that helps the budget is, at the moment, because we haven't got those places, we end up placing children in the independent sector, and those places can be anything from 20 to 30 to 40,000 pounds more per place. So by having maintained places, it will reduce the financial envelope. And for some parents, because they don't like the places that are on offer at the moment on the island, they ask us if we'll put an education other than at school package in place, and quite often they're double the price of a special school place. So there's money to be saved here, as well as making sure actually children get a better deal. So children get a better deal and it costs less money. And the other bit that I want to do is to try and reduce to an absolute minimum the number of off-island placements. You might think there's hundreds of these. There aren't. The last time I checked, it was less than 20. And for some of those pupils, it's absolutely correct, because they're children that have gone into care that have been placed with a foster family on the mainland, and therefore they're now attending a school that's very close to them. And for those children, of course, they need to carry on attending those schools. We've then got a strand around alternative provision, and I'm sorry because I'm on a soapbox on this one. At the moment, we have the ILC, which is an all-age pupil referral unit, and I'll cards on the table. I hate the idea of a primary PRU. I think it's abhorrent as an idea. I really struggle with it as a concept. So you say to a 5-year-old at the age of 5, you're not good enough to be in our school. Your behaviour is so bad, we're excluding you permanently, and you are then going to attend the provision in Newport, where a load of 13, 14-year-old kids who have been excluded go. It just doesn't feel right to me. And it's a system we don't have in Hampshire. What we have in Hampshire is a primary behaviour service, and Councillor Andre's come over and visited the one in Gosport. I was hopefully impressed with what she saw. So they have a behavioural curriculum. First of all, the staff go out and they work alongside teachers to develop their teaching skills around children with challenging behaviour. But they can also have the children in reach for up to a couple of days a week, and quite often the staff will come out of the school and watch the techniques that they're doing that they can tend to take back. Saw a brilliant session recently with Lego therapy, and the teacher was really skillfully adding levels of frustration in. So the child was getting frustrated deliberately and then saying, so what are the strategies you can now do to make sure you don't bubble over the top? And the teaching them the strategies to make sure the frustration didn't go out into more challenging behaviours. Really good stuff. We have a behavioural curriculum called the 6 Strands curriculum. And in Hampshire, we have about 2 permanent exclusions every year of primary. There's about a 10th of the cohort over here. So that ought to mean, if it was so successful, it would be 1 permanent exclusion every 4 years, you know, which would be fantastic if we could get to that rate on. What we would then do is to focus the pupil referral unit, the ILC, onto secondary aged pupils more appropriately, in my view. There's then a strand around preparation for adulthood. So we talk to young people, and what they tell us is the second most important thing to them is that they get a good job And the reason why they say that is because it gives them the financial independence, and they feel it fills them full of self-esteem because they've got a job and they're holding down a job. That leads to more independent living. So with that, we've put a capital bid in, and I'm feeling optimistic about it, for something called an employability hub. Andy and myself have been out to the college and had conversations with the principal there about setting up an employability hub. And the idea of that is, over a 3-year period, you work with the young people and to try and encourage them onto supported internships, which lead to a proper job, a good job. The Isle of Wight College already does some of this, so it's strengthening on what we're already doing. And what we then expect them to do is to come off a supported internship onto a supported apprenticeship and into the world of work. And of course, when they're then on a supported apprenticeship, the funding comes from a different route, and you're then saving money for the high needs block. So again, good for the young people, good for the high needs block. It is possible to do both. We've got work to do with employers about making sure we've got as many opportunities in the marketplace for supported apprenticeships and supported internships. So I know Councillor Andre and Andy and others attended a conference recently called the Inclusive Economy, where we were having those debates. And there's more I think the council can do about, when you are letting contracts, can we build in opportunities for supported internships and supported apprenticeships in there? And then the last initiative we want post-16 is, we don't have resource provisions in the post-16 arena, and we'd like to build, preferably at the Isle of Wight College, a independence hub, which is a resource provision where the students can go there and can still mix with their cohort of mates, but can have some specialist support around their SEN needs as well. And I'm confident we've got some capital money hopefully coming our way as well to fund that. So yeah, those are the strands. I hope you get a sense from that. This isn't back of a fag packet stuff. It's things we've thought about deeply and tried to put together a kind of comprehensive strategy for you to consider. And my plea is, on an annual basis, as a committee, if you could check that those strands are all being implemented and you're holding feet to the fire, I think it'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's a good action for us as a committee to do. I think it's essential. And it is good news. You know, thank you for bringing some good news, Brian. It's excellent. I'll open to questions before I start to go on. Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brian. Firstly, I just wanted to go back to the what was it called? Sorry, I've lost my safety valve funding. So nationally, the gap between the cost of funding providing SEND support and the funding available is currently 1.9 billion, estimated to rise to 3.6 billion by 2025 if there's no intervention by government. So that's quite scary to me. So you mentioned before, we're looking to secure 25 million through the valve funding. Was that correct?
It's a number of things. So that money includes the capital money for the new preschool. It includes the capital money for the employability hub, the capital money for the independence hub, plus a write-off of the high needs deficit. So we're back to reset back to zero.
Because I was just curious, what, given that figure nationally, have we identified what our gap is as a council?
Yeah, we've currently got a cumulative deficit of about 6.3 million, and it's increasing by about 1.5 million a year at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah,
which is the 12 million.
Yeah.
So that's the point. So what we do is, so what it does is we take these measures. We've sat down with the DFE, and everybody thinks that if we take these measures, we'll come into an in-year balance, all things being equal. At which point the 12 million is written off. Now, the other thing I would say about the national numbers, they are big and scary, and I make a point of pointing out to people that they're big and scary. But actually, if you then put in the amount of funding that is available in the overall school's budget, it's a fixable problem with a small percentage change in the funding between mainstream and high needs block, because you're talking about hundreds, I think it's hundreds of billions of pounds in the overall school's budget. So it starts to be a small, although it looks really scary, it's actually a relatively small proportion of the overall spend on schools.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brian. In the building capacity bit, you mentioned about the external consultants, and we're down to the final two selecting them. What's the timeline of selecting the final outcome, and how long will it take to go through all the schools and get some impact?
We're almost there with letting the contract, and I know the consultants that get appointed will want to roll that out as quickly as possible. So there'll be some. We're talking about having an inclusion conference in September, right at the start of the academic year, where we will go through all these different strategies to launch them. So that's what we're looking at. Is getting ready during the summer term so that we're properly all aligned and ready to go for the new academic year.
Councillor Oliver, then Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brian. It's nice to see someone who's actually very passionate about what they're talking about and yeah, the subject matter. I certainly welcome the announcement today with the funding for the extra school within hopefully Carisbrooke area. Yeah, my only concern, and it's something which I know we can work on, is the amount of specialist teachers and the support staff which goes alongside of that. I mean, I come from a St George's background as far as my particular look at it, and the one thing we do struggle with is specialist teachers and more than nursing staff, which goes alongside of that. When you've got teachers being taken out to look after them, to do a nurse's job because they can't get the nursing, back up to it. It's something that I think we seriously need to look at longer term, if we can.
I couldn't agree more with you. And one of the things I've learned from the opening of 2 new special schools that I've overseen in recent years is you don't go for 75 children on the first day. You have to scale this up over time, because if you take 75 children who have been partly educated in the OTIS packages, partly educated in this school, that school and the other school, and put them all together, it just doesn't work, particularly if it's ASC and social, emotional, mental health needs. So one of the things we need to really be careful is to have a strategy group over the opening of that new school, think really carefully about how much we can staff it each year and build that up over a couple of years, because that has to be done really sensitively and carefully, otherwise it'll go horribly.
Councillor Downer.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Brian. I'd just like to ask about the advisors and also the bespoke training. Now, who will be doing that? Because I'm quite sceptical in a way about advisors. How much practical experience have they got? Thank you.
So most of the training will be done by special needs inspectors that we employ. They have all worked either in special schools or have got a track record of being really experienced good SENCOs in mainstream schools. So they're practitioners that have come out of school. And what we tend to do is they join our school improvement team for us 3-4 years, and then they tend, because they've worked for our school improvement team, they can then take their pick of whatever job they want. So I've just had one, Jarlath, who we trained up, and he's walked into a headship elsewhere in the country. And that's kind of what happens is we get people in, they're really experienced specialists in SEN, they come and join us, they learn even more by doing this work, and then they move on. But it does mean our inspectors are current and have recently come out of classroom and out of schools.
Councillor Lever.
There you go. Sorry, surprised me. With the green paper, is it? I tried reading a lot of it today, but I was also working, so it's difficult. But is it? Will it affect? Is it clear if it affects funding and how we get access to funding yet in a negative instance?
I'm sorry, I'll definitely. No, is the answer. It's not clear on how it affects funding. One of the things that through other channels we're pushing for is a revision to the funding formula. This doesn't do it. I just looked up the numbers actually because I slightly misquoted. So the total schools funding in the last year is 57.3 billion, of which there's an overspend on the high needs block of 1.9 billion. So you can see that's about 3 and a bit %, isn't it? So my point still stands, which is it isn't a major tweak to bring that back in line. Yeah, So
What they've said in the response document today is the £2 billion extra that's going into education, they're going to put 400 million of that towards the high needs block. I don't think that's sufficient actually, but yeah, that's the figure that's in the response today.
Sorry, that was kind of going to be my follow-up question. To that was the LGA have come out after the Green Paper has said that I believe while they commend the intent of some of the things in there, that it does not address the cost and demand issues. So my question was going to be, there was a lot of nice things up in that strategy, but how confident are we that we'll be able to deliver all that?
Yeah, so for my sense that I'm the president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services this year. So I've been on various bits of media today saying exactly that, to be honest. The way that we framed it is that it's a step in the right direction, but it isn't the whole journey. And partly that is because at the beginning of this year, we had 3 major policy initiatives on the stocks from government, and we were very optimistic about that. We had the independent review of children's social care, which has come through this panel. We've talked about that. We had the green paper on SEN, which we're talking about now, and we had the white paper on education. It is the white paper on education that is the missing piece of this jigsaw, because that white paper talked about an inclusive system and standards for multi-academy trusts and academies around inclusiveness, and essentially being inspected for that inclusiveness. That's disappeared off the radar. So what we have is a view of the SEN system almost in isolation, without a sort of a nesting of it within mainstream. And the minister did say on the radio this morning that his ambition is for more schools to be more inclusive. And that's really good that he said that out loud, because it's sort of alluded to in the green paper. But it's about how you make that happen in a world which is still driven by exam results, data, and in some respects the antithesis of an inclusive ethos. That's what we'll wrestle with for the next few years, I suspect.
Thank you. So I've only got a couple of things. Is under preparation for adulthood, Brian, you mentioned about contract management and putting into contracts about provision of jobs. We're doing community wealth building on that, and so that fits perfectly with that. So that's just a case of saying that's what needs to go into any contract. So that should be fairly easy. And the other one was, you talked quite a lot about problems, but in terms of the island, what do we see as the handbrakes? You know, because this is fantastic news, and I can see why you're so excited about it. But all the time is, you know, who's got the hand on the handbrake, and what are those handbrakes likely to be?
I think one of the key bits of work we're going to have to do, and it came up during the Ofsted inspection, and we've recently been surveying parents, is parents don't believe, or a proportion of parents do not believe their children will get a good deal with SEN unless they get an EHCP in place. So it's the piece of work, I think, with parents to make sure that they see that schools do actually deliver against the national standards and children get the support they need without having to go through all the rigmarole of applying for an EHCP. It should just come as a right at centre court, and we should only have the EHCPs for the really most complex children. But at the moment, parents don't believe that all schools do that, and therefore there's a body of work, I think, with the parental people. So we, as I said, we just surveyed parents actually to get some data around that. But what I've just said is really what it says.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? Marvellous. Moving on to the next point. Who's taking that? It is indeed.
Okay, thank you. I don't expect you to call me Uncle Andy like you did Uncle Brian, so I will.
Uncle Andy. Okay.
I'll more formally introduce myself. So I'm Andy Tickner, Interim County Education Manager for Participation and Lifelong Learning. I work for Hampshire County Council, but I do live on the island, literally 10 minutes away. So coming to Scrutiny like this is quite good for me, rather than going to Winchester. My responsibility includes the management of the council's careers and participation service, so Island Futures, as you know them. Hence why I'm providing this update on pathways for post-16 education and training. So the report I submitted responds to the focus for the scrutiny. So it includes a summary and a reminder of the statutory requirements for post-16 education, the career support and the post-16 options available for young people on the island. And I've included a breakdown of the pathways that they are currently choosing to take. Our performance on post-16 participation, our statutory performance, and that responds to the committee's question, has the island continued to have higher rates than national average? And I'll confirm that later. And some wider economic context, and that relates to the question about strategic influence and meeting needs of the local labour market. And there was a particular reference to the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership in the question. And the landscape's moving on that, and I'll update members on that one. I get to say next slide, please. Next slide, please, Brian. Sorry, so just go back one. I was just on the sort of front page then still, sorry. So statutory position, let me just update on that. Okay, so local authorities have broad duties to encourage, enable and assist young people to participate in education and training post-16. As I put in that slide, that's contained within the Education Act 1996 and Education Skills Act 2008. And also a further update in 2011. And it was at that point that the Raising the Participation Age, or RPA legislation, was introduced. And that required all young people by 2015 to stay in education and training until they were 18. So we're now 7 or 8 years into the landscape where young people are staying in education and or training until they're 18. You break down the statutory position, there are 4 key requirements that apply involving local authorities, schools and young people. The council picks up 2 of those 4. Firstly, we are required to make sure there is suitable and sufficient education and training places to allow full participation. And that's for all young people aged 16 to 18 and up to 25 for those with special educational needs with a maintained EHCP. That's more a strategic commissioning role. We don't fund a lot of this, so we have an overview of the provision and work with schools and further education providers to ensure that provision is of good quality and it meets the overall profile, meeting the needs of the young people and the demands of employers on the island. The second part of the local authority is we must support young people to progress into the right post-16 pathways and track their participation. And that includes those that are not in education, employment and training or NEET, to provide intensive support to help them move back into a positive destination. And we have to report back to the Department for Education on that stuff, and we are held to account. There's then a duty on the schools themselves, and this is, again, changed in that 2011 legislation, that they have to provide the careers programme for their students. That is not a statutory duty on the local authority, that is on schools themselves. And that's been in place since 2011. And some colleagues might remember that prior to that, there was a government-funded career service called Connections with an X. And you might remember the Connections office in the old county press building just up the high street here. So that was chupied across, or it stopped, and that provision moved across to local authorities in 2011. But the statutory responsibility on careers programmes sits with the schools. And finally, the last piece of the statutory jigsaw, so RPA legislation actually places a duty on the young people themselves to participate. It's their duty. Our role is there to support them to meet their duty. And even though it's a duty, there are no sanctions that apply if they don't. So it's in their interests. It's important that they start off on the right career, but there is no sanction if they choose not to. Next slide, please, Brian. So how do we support them to choose the right pathway? So careers support. So the government provides some statutory guidance. As I said, schools have a statutory responsibility. Government provides some guidance setting out the requirements for the careers programme that they should provide for their students. And it includes a framework which is known as the Gatsby benchmarks, and that sets out 8 individual strands that make up a good careers programme. It requires careers programs to be impartial. They should be individualised for each student or young person. And it includes the more traditional one-to-one careers interviews that we would know, but also stresses the importance of encounters with employers and with further education providers. So it basically maps out a really broad careers programme, and schools are responsible for leading on these. It would be impossible for them to do that individually. So it's really important that there's strong collaboration between the council's careers service, Island Futures, the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, because the current way that government funds careers activity, local enterprise partnerships do receive some of this funding through what they call careers hubs, and they focus more on enterprise initiatives with schools. And the third piece of the jigsaw really on the island is the Island Careers Partnership, quite unique to the island. That was already established independently. So it's a voluntary group of employers, very much employer-led. Some people might know Richard White, who was previously the principal of the Studio School and worked at CCAM for a while as well. So Richard and some other employers work on a voluntary basis, but they provide really helpful support linking local businesses with schools and help the schools to meet some of those Gatsby benchmarks that they're required to. So the Island Futures team supports all of this activity, supports schools and young people by offering a wide range of what I would say is very good careers resources online. And these have been developed with employers and with further education and higher education partners, including, for example, the Southern Universities Network. And I would say that, there's not many positives that have come from the pandemic, but one thing we had to do to respond to the pandemic is we had to go online with a lot of our career support. And because of that, I would say that the resources and the virtual learning environment we offer is massively improved compared to what it was in 2019, 2020. So every cloud, as they say. There's also a really strong partnership, existing strong partnership between schools and the further education providers to ensure young people are aware of all academic and vocational and technical pathways. It's particularly important on the Isle of Wight, where we have a significant number of schools with their own sixth form. This already happens as best practice. I would say we're in a strong position. The last bullet point on this slide shares that there is now new provider access legislation. This was introduced in January this year, and it places clear requirements on schools to offer a minimum number of encounters with post-16 providers to ensure their students are aware of the benefits of apprenticeships, T-levels and other technical routes, and can consider them equally alongside the academic options. So I would say that we've been doing this well as best practice. This now means that there is a requirement to do so and provides it with some more structure. The other positive coming out of the provider access legislation is that schools must do this earlier. And so it introduces careers activity and this engagement from year 8 onwards. And I think that is a positive move. Next slide, please. Thanks, Brian. So the actual pathways, what is the offer currently? So young people have choices when considering their post-16 options. It's not just staying at school. They can stay in full-time education either at school or go to college, or they can move into employment with training. That is also compliant as part of the raising participation age. That would normally mean an apprenticeship, but it might mean other employment with some sort of part-time training attached. Or they can take a training course, which the government describes separately, a combination of education and work placement. So people might be aware of traineeships. So although they are an education programme, the hub of that is a employer placement with the academic wrapped around it. So it's a different model to a full-time education programme. There is a broad and comprehensive range of post-16 academic, technical and vocational courses available on the island. I think the offer to young people on the island is very good. Across school sixth forms, the Isle of Wight College obviously being a very prominent provider. but also other training providers such as HTP, Platform One, UK Sailing Academy. All are part of the overall offer, which is comprehensive. A positive is that all post-16 provision on the island is rated good by Ofsted. So even though some of that post-16 provision is in a school that is currently requiring improvement, the post-16 judgment is good. So the majority of young people stay in full-time education. In the report, I included some details on the overall cohort. Every year, year 12, 13, the total is around 2,800. This year, we have 2,346 of those who have chosen to stay in full-time education. And the proportion of those taking academic and vocational technical routes is broadly 50-50. It's broadly equal. Of those that are going into sixth forms, mainly studying A-levels, roughly half of those attend the Island Sixth Form campus here in Newport. So they provide A-levels for roughly half of all A-levels on the island. And that's across a broad range of subjects. Over 30 A-level programs are available at the Sixth Form campus. The remainder of A-level provision is across sixth forms at Cowes, Christ the King and Ryde, which make up the other half. And of those choosing further education courses, approximately 80 to 85% of all young people that are going into vocational technical attend the Isle of Wight College. And again, the college provides a broad range of technical and vocational courses, and they do respond well to the skills needs of employers and the wider support of the island community. Oh, Brian, I'm not quite. I just wanted to add to that. The college, as I said, is a very important provider. They do respond well to government initiatives and the needs of local employers. I want to highlight one example, which is the introduction of T-levels, which are technical levels. When I say, I'm going to say they're a new 2-year technical course. They've been around for a couple of years now, but only really piloted. So the main rollout is happening this year. They're broadly equivalent to 3 A-levels. So they are the technical equivalent of an A-level programme. The college already offers courses as part of the pilot in digital technology, engineering and health. They're introducing new courses starting this September in construction, hospitality and financial services. There are some others, but I'm highlighting those in particular. As an example, I know their construction T-level is going to include a focus on retrofit and low carbon construction. So that's being really responsive to not only the local economy, but some of the wider issues. That supports the council's wider strategy on climate change, for example. And the college is also part of the Solent Institute of Technology programme. So they're working with 4 other FE colleges across the Solent area and 2 HE establishments, Solent and Portsmouth unis. And because of that funding, they are currently improving their facilities at the main campus and at the CCAM Centre. So as of September, they'll be offering higher technical qualifications at level 4+ on the back of that investment and improved facilities. Just very briefly on young people with EHCPs, education healthcare plans. They're well supported by special schools and have access to vocational pathways. Brian's already mentioned we're introducing an employability hub model this year as part of Safety Valve. We will be rolling out and increasing the number of supported internships and creating new pathways into employment for these young people, including supported internship apprenticeships. And just finally, the final bullet point about young people moving into employment. We are seeing an increase in the number of young people moving into employment, both with and without formal training. I provided a breakdown in the report of those moving into apprenticeships and the pathways that are most popular, typically construction, engineering, hospitality and catering. We are finding that some young people are being impacted by the cost of living crisis. They're finding it difficult to sustain education financially, and essentially they're telling us they need an income. So if they do move into employment, And that means they are EAT, not NEAT, so it is still a positive outcome. We work really hard to try and turn that into an apprenticeship or to supplement the job that they've got with some sort of part-time training wherever possible. Okay, thanks, Brian. Next slide. Okay, so I said I'd come back to this. The question, has the island continued to have higher rates than national average? I'm very pleased to confirm that the answer is a resounding yes. Our statutory performance is again strong and significantly above national and regional figures. This work is led by the Island Futures team, and they lead on the statutory function. That includes working with schools in year 11 to confirm the intended destinations of young people, and providing intensive support for those that don't have an intended destination, and in particular focusing on young people with special educational needs and disabilities and those in care. Those that statistically we know are more likely to become NEET if they don't get that support. So we do focus and target our resource where possible. And we liaise with post-16 providers to assist with applications for young people in those cohorts in particular. That statutory function includes the September guarantee, looking at the first bullet point here. That's a process where we need to ensure all young people completing Key Stage 4 receive the information, advice and guidance they need to apply for and secure that place in post-16. So the Isle of Wight Council's performance was already above national average on this. It's improved only marginally. We were 98.2% last year. We are 98.3% this year. But that means we rank highest in the South East region for this measure. And I've shared on that second bullet exactly how much higher than South East and national we are. We are the only authority that are above 98% in the South East. So we do a very good job supporting young people. When I say we, this is a combined effort, the local authority, the schools, the training providers, working together to help young people progress into post-16. Then, once they've got that guaranteed offer, the next challenge is actually converting that into, they go to that offer and they are in education, employment and training. And again, we are very good at converting that guarantee into actual education. So our figure at the moment, and this was at December 22, the last data was available, the proportion of young people in education, employment and training was 96.2%. And that compares with 92% in the South East and 94% nationally. So we were over 2 percentage points above the national figure. And subsequently, if we've got high NEAT, then we have low, sorry, we've got high EAT, we've got low NEAT. Make sure I get that the right way around, otherwise that's embarrassing. So our NEAT figure on the Isle of Wight is, again, always below regional and national average. But I just want to add some context to this. We are seeing the NEAT figure go up in this year. That's not unique to the Isle of Wight. We're seeing the same in Hampshire. We link in with local government association. It is a national situation. It is a aftershock or a shockwave of the pandemic. You've got young people who experienced COVID in Key Stage 4. We are seeing some challenges in relation to emotional well-being and resilience. We are looking to introduce new programs to support where we can. I had a conversation with the Isle of Wight Youth Trust this morning, where we're looking to offer some sort of support alongside our careers professionals to help these young people move back into education. Thanks, Brian. Next slide. Does this mean I need to crack on? Yeah, okay. Right, okay. So local economy, Skills for Jobs white paper, which was published in 2021, set out the government's blueprint for reshaping the technical skills system. The response to that, the Department for Education is introducing local skills improvement plans. And this plays to the conversation we're having and what I've been saying about the need for the education offer to respond to the local economy. It already does. The college, for example, has employer forums for every curriculum area, for every specialist area. This is a way of having a national review, a structure, and formalising this. So there is going to be a local skills improvement plan for every LEP area. That means there'll be 38 nationally. We fall in the Solent area. But interestingly, and I mentioned this earlier about the change in the landscape, employer representative bodies are being asked to lead this, not LEPs. So it is the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce and the Isle of Wight Chamber of Commerce that is leading this process. And the purpose for that is to put employers at the heart of the system. So what we are going to see, there is a review between now and June 23. There will be recommendations about how the education offer, particularly in relation to vocational and technical, needs to change. So there will be, the Isle of Wight College, for example, will receive information about how it may need to change its curriculum offer. This in turn will help young people to go onto the right courses to develop the skills they need to secure good local jobs and careers. So it's a really important piece of work. There are consultation events already underway. There was one at the Isle of Wight College last Friday, which I know Councillor Andre attended. There have been 8 events across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight event was by far the best attended. So it shows that Isle of Wight employers are really engaged and they want to make sure that this works for them. Watch this space on that one. So, in summary, last slide. Thanks, Brian. There are effective partnerships and well-established partnerships between the local authority, schools and post-16 providers on the island. And that ensures young people on the island can participate in education, employment and training that is right for them. As I've just described and confirmed in the report, we have very high levels of participation post-16, strong performance against the statutory duties, and we are above national average. There is a broad and comprehensive range of full-time post-16 academic, technical and vocational courses available. It offers good choice to young people on the island. Technical pathways will continue to be developed and we will be responding to the LSIP process positively. Thank you, and sorry if I've gone slightly over.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Questions from the committee? Councillor Downer and then Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Andy, for an excellent presentation. And it's pleasing to see that there's more people going into vocational education as opposed to, am I correct? Would I be correct in saying that the schools are not pushing university places so much now? Because they used to, and it was that university was the answer to everything. Well, patently it's not. So I think that's very good. And hopefully with that in mind, that will keep more young people on the island into employment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of related to Councillor Downer's point there, except my current concern here is when we think about demographics on the Isle of Wight, and in fact we have a distinct lack of young people on the island as opposed to other areas. What pathways, you mentioned a lot of pathways that we've currently got that we're advertising. What pathways on the island are we currently lacking, and what strategies do we have to counter that?
Well, as far as pathways are concerned, I mean, we have a good balance and we respond well to academic and vocational. The challenge, the lacking, is this piece of work regarding the local skills improvement plan. So we have good numbers and good quality of vocational technical provision, but is it the right provision for the needs of the local economy? And this significant piece of work that the LSIP will provide should give that steer in that direction. It's important to future-proof what we're providing here. And it's interesting, another comment to add to this is that absolutely the Isle of Wight College and the Isle of Wight education system should be preparing young people for the world of work or to move into higher education. And that world of work should be focusing on the island economy. But I'm an island resident. I've got a 19-year-old at uni at Surrey. I've got a 16-year-old doing her year 11 GCSEs this year. I'd like them to be looking at options, not just on the Isle of Wight. So the LSIP process will focus on needs of the local economy, but not exclusively. There will still be provision. There'll still be courses that the Isle of Wight College will offer, that might not be necessarily responding directly to the island economy. It'll be responding to what young people are asking for and what some of the more national and global challenges are. So issues around, so courses around technology, which is evolving every year. We'll be looking at what the island needs, but we'll be looking further afield than that as well.
Okay, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, the employer event that I attended, and as we've heard, we come under the Solent area for the LSIP, but I would just like to highlight that one of the points that was made very strongly and was taken on board is that the island has its unique qualities, and initially there was some concern that we might be, as so often happens, sort of merged into a Solent offer. And that absolutely, I can reassure you, it was very much taken on board that the work that is going to be done is going to be looking at very much the island's trends to feed into that. Because as we know, post-pandemic, the trends in employment have changed. And I think this is a really important piece of work that's going to help us to identify how the island economy has changed and to actually match and as Andy says, to future-proof the job opportunities to actually keep our young people on the island.
One last one from me, as you'd expect, having two reports in succession that are giving us good news, which is unheard of. If you had a magic wand, Andy, what would you want to do better? I know that's quite a big task, considering that the numbers are all on the right side of good. So magic wand time.
The first thing that comes to mind is the piece of work we're doing, particularly around young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And Brian made reference to, there was a really good event during half term, which the Isle of Wight Regeneration team has been working on around inclusive island. And that particular strand, our development manager for special educational needs attended that event, made some really good contacts with employers. If we're going to give those young people better opportunities, bringing employers on board and having a commitment from them is really important, as well as the actual provision of the supported internship at the Isle of Wight College, for example. If I had a magic wand, I'd like to create 50 or 100 supported employment opportunities for young people with special educational needs. We know there's going to be a challenge, but we're up for the challenge, and we have really a good starting point with employers on the island.
That sounds like a good number to write into any future strategy. I think that's excellent. Thank you. Councillor Andre, briefly.
Very briefly, just to add to that, one of the messages that came through from the Inclusive Island workshop was that actually there are some significant advantages to employers in employing and in being inclusive. And the retention rates are much higher, about 23% retention rate, which is much higher than those that are, that are not inclusive. But also, it's the purple pound is worth a lot of money to the island economy. So there are a lot of drivers to actually be more inclusive. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Could you just turn your microphone off for me? It tends to cause bother if you leave them on. Thank you. Moving on then to item 8, school attainment. Whose is that?
Good afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, it's Natalie Smith, County Education Manager for Secondary Post 16, but I'm also involved across all phases on the island, and it's from that position that I talk through this report with you. So when you look at the attainment of young people on the Isle of Wight, it's really important to first think about the context in which those outcomes were achieved. We've just come through a pandemic. We know that the year before the pandemic and the last set of outcomes for the Isle of Wight's young people real significant progress was made. But it actually takes time to embed things, and the environment of a pandemic is not one in which really good, strong, improved practice can easily embed. So there was that aspect of the pandemic. There was also the aspects of the pandemic which at one point in time saw the Isle of Wight being the reddest. Do you remember the colour maps? So there was a point in time where the Isle of Wight had more COVID than anywhere else in the country. And when you're a teacher or a head teacher in a school that is small and you've knocked out a couple of staff, that brings its own really very specific challenges. And schools really felt that over the pandemic. I'll talk about this a bit later, but as a school improvement team, we really needed to switch our focus through that time to supporting schools, supporting leaders and helping them to support the children and families that were so scared and so hungry and so badly hit by it. So it was a real shift across those 2 years. Attendance is absolutely key to good outcomes. We've always known that, but attendance across the island, which was so strong through the pandemic, really dropped off as we came out of it. We're not sure why. It still is low, but we are working really hard with schools to improve that, because we know that actually for those young people that were in school for more than 90% of the time at Key Stage 4, their outcomes were better than national. It had a massive impact. There's also the DfE insistence that we should be very careful about comparing data with 2019 because the impact of the pandemic was so varied. And there's also the fact that across the period of the pandemic, or since 2019 is the best way of putting it, the number of pupils experiencing disadvantage as measured by the percent claiming free school meals has increased. There's been a sharp increase in disadvantage. We worked hard, as we always do, through the period of the pandemic, but I said we refocused really into a supportive way of working. And in terms of school improvement, we didn't have that footfall in schools that we have had since and we had before. Much of our work was remote. We also found that for schools that were able to maintain kind of an outward looking attending CPD focus through the pandemic, results were significantly better. So there was a 16% better set of outcomes for the schools that continued to attend the assessment networks and the English and maths provision that were put on for us by schools for their year 6 children. And for the schools that weren't able to attend those, it wasn't because they didn't value it, it was because they tended to be small schools where the staff had been knocked out because of the pandemic, so they just couldn't field enough staff to attend courses. So we're working, actually, we have a small schools project to ensure that they're much better proofed against that kind of thing. But the pandemic was a surprise to all of us, so we were all hit. We were not on the front foot with that. Oh, thank you. So if we then move on to primary attainment, foundation, when they are age 5, they are assessed against something called the early years goals. That's moving away as an assessment measure. But we've talked to you about it tonight because it's something that those of you that have been here previously will remember. And they have traditionally been very strong on the island, and that's sustained over this period. Moving on to Key Stage 2. Key Stage 2 was where the Isle of Wight took its biggest hit. Key Stage 2 outcomes were really not good enough. They weren't good enough in any of the measures for reading, writing or maths, and they were very much not good enough in the combined, because many of the children that missed one therefore didn't get the combined, but are actually quite strong in one. But I think what we need to remember in that is that there were some schools that did exceptionally well, way above national. And the reason it's important to recognise that is because the work that I need to do with leaders is persuading them that there is nothing different about the Isle of Wight in terms of the potential of the children to achieve. So keeping those schools kind of front and centre and keeping those results and the fact that people know about them front and centre, it's not hiding the fact that we know there's a big problem. It's making sure that people understand, leaders understand, teachers understand, children understand that it can't remain like that, and there is every possibility of it moving forward. significantly this year, as long as everyone works together to put the right things in place. So we are, a lot of you have heard some of this because we are more than 2/3 of the way through what we've put in place to address the Key Stage 2 outcomes. So we have been more insistent and helpful to schools in attending the assessment and core provision networks. When I say helpful to schools, I mean being really responsive to the times of day that we put things on. And we have fully funded a Year 6 project, and that took the research that we've collected over the last few years. It worked out very carefully what we had done with schools that had had most impact, and it pulled that together into a project that we are now, as I said, 2/3 of the way through. What we've added is really significant governor involvement, because governance really dropped away over the period of the pandemic in terms of focus on outcomes. Governors were very good at ensuring the well-being of their heads, and so they should have been, but that refocus on outcomes are really important has been helped by including them in this project through the year. Well, we have also, we've brought to primary schools a range of other opportunities as well. This ties in with what Brian was talking about earlier. We're very conscious that there has been a rise in children with perceived special educational needs across the island. So we've spoken to leaders about what they think would be most helpful. And we've got in there right now, without waiting for all of these great things that will come with the safety valve programme. And we focus particularly on speech and language development. So training teachers to work with children around that, because they have shared with us that that is the biggest impediment to progress that's emerged through the pandemic. And actually 80% of children with SEMH, which is the emotional special educational need, actually have undiagnosed or diagnosed speech, language and communication difficulties. So tapping into that has been something that we've needed to really get on with. And we've added that to what is quite a comprehensive and continuing CPD programme, so professional development programme for leaders and teachers across our primary sector. Moving on to secondary attainment. Secondary attainment, I know it was reported in the press that the Isle of Wight was bottom of everything right when the results came out. That was because the Ofqual data that they looked at that time was split by county. So the Isle of Wight was separated out, and Portsmouth and Southampton, that are on par with the Isle of Wight or actually haven't done so well in some instances, was incorporated in with Hampshire. So the data set looked at was not the data set through which the DFE look at things and the data set which has now been published. So I suspect that will come every year. It's useful to for you to know that it isn't the data set that matters in terms of looking at how young people on the Isle of Wight have done. So at the end of Key Stage 4, age 16, the basics measure, which is English and Maths at grade 4, which is the new path. So grade 4 and above, that improved. English improved phenomenally. It improved by ½ a grade across the island, whereas nationally it increased by 0.2 of a grade. So made a really big leap there. We were held back by maths, and we've done lots of very forensic looking at that. And we realised the components of the papers that they were broadly not getting, which was stopping them getting from a 3 to a 4. And we've put lots in place this year to make sure that those 3s this year will reach those 4s, and that unlocks the basics measure in which we'll see improvements. Attainment 8, so that's across 8 qualifications. It's very specific qualifications. It has to include English, Maths, Sciences, Humanities, but that's the next DFE's measure, and that also shows that Isle of Wight pupils have moved forward. They haven't moved forward as much as we want them to move forward, and that's partly because English and Maths are double counted in it. So the impact of maths on the basics has also fed through into the Attainment 8 score. The EBAC, I'm sorry that secondary performance measures are so difficult, but the EBAC looks at 5 qualifications. It's not something that children are measured on, but it's something that the DfE is very, very keen on measuring schools on. And the average grade in the EBAC across the Isle of Wight improved significantly. And what I was really pleased about was that the percent of children entered for the EBAC, which is a more academic skew, had increased and was in line with national. And that doesn't preclude the skills agenda or the fact that we know that vocational qualifications are really important for young people. It just means that at that point in time, they've been given all of those options, so there are more choices available, is probably how I would summarise that. So in all headline measures, children did move forward, but for us, it's still a key thing of importance to keep that improvement trajectory going. What's interesting, it's quite tricky to see the colours on this, but there's a mix of blue and red dots, and the bottom axis, the x-axis, shows the increase in deprivation by postcode of children in schools. Up on the left axis, you have the Attainment 8 score. So the Attainment 8 goes up, looking at the y-axis. And all of those blue and red dots are schools, Hampshire and Isle of Wight schools. The red dots are Isle of Wight schools. And what you can see from that, and this isn't something, this is actually quite a sad slide, really, I think, because it shows, which we all know, the massive impact that deprivation has on outcomes. They correlate exactly across Hampshire, across the Isle of Wight. If you had national on there, it would look exactly the same. And because the postcodes of children in our Isle of Wight schools are highly deprived, I have to be really careful with that slide, because what we do not want is teachers, leaders in the system thinking that because their children are deprived, they won't be able to succeed. So that's why this slide is not in the pack, and it won't be. But what it does show, and it's quite heartening for those of us that, you know, really, really work hard with schools, and heartening for the leaders that work really hard and the teachers that work really hard, is that actually all but one of the Isle of Wight schools are punching above their weight relative to Hampshire schools. They're actually doing better for their young people relative to their levels of deprivation. So that's just for us, really. So it's a good news story in terms of the impact of what's happening in your schools. But it's a real call to arms for me. You know, this isn't acceptable. We really need to keep working on that agenda. And I think the safety valve will feed into that. So next steps in secondary schools. We've gone back to our annual visits in person. That's the same as in primary schools, and that footfall is incredibly helpful. You can see an awful lot more, feel an awful lot more if you're in schools, as Councillor Andre will know, because she's been on a number of school visits with me. We're really focused on project work for exam prep, and that's across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, because of course there's much less secondary schools than there are primary schools. So to get that great big cohort of, you know, 25 people that are from schools and are engaged with preparing pupils for exams, to get that big cohort and all of those discussions, you want to go across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight with a mix of in-person and online sessions. So we're doing an awful lot of things with schools. We continue with our subject networks. They're really well engaged, academies and maintained schools, and we are hoping that that will impact on further improving those outcomes this year. Post-16 is a real strength, actually. It's a real strength, as Andy's explained, in terms of participation. But for those children that do stay and do vocational level 3 A-level courses, they actually do well. They still could do better, but they do much better than and have improved at a faster rate than national in many of the qualifications shared. So you've got your straight A levels, you've got technical qualifications, and you've got another, what's the other?
Applied general.
Applied general. Thank you. I was rehearsing this earlier. And in all of those measures, things have really improved, which is heartening. And the balance of children doing vocational, apprentice-led and A-level courses across the island, as Andy explained, is very strong. So moving on to children experiencing vulnerability, which as you've seen by the graph slide is a lot on the Isle of Wight. Across the country, the impact on outcomes this year was significant. So the government has put lots of money into schools to help them try and close the gap, and it has slowly been closing in the years till 2019. It sprang apart everywhere here. So really, because the Isle of Wight has such great levels of deprivation, we'd have expected almost to see a bigger impact at Key Stage 4 and 5. The significant effort that's gone into schools, I think recently helped to shore us up against that, but it's still enormous, that gap, and it needs to be a continued focus of everything that we all collectively do. One of the biggest things there is attendance. So attendance and deprivation follow each other, or deprivation, then attendance, then outcomes. And we are able to do really focused work and work out what's going to have the most impact on the Isle of Wight, which we don't know because we can't really look back in time because the situation is so different now. And we ran a project, which I've spoken to you about previously, some of you about, where we focused on year 11 attendance across the period of the Christmas holiday. We ran a media campaign. We sent letters home from the local authority. 95% and below attendance isn't good enough. We removed the children for whom attendance at school is an issue. That wouldn't have been fair. And we sent letters to those with 98% attendance and above, which is good. We asked schools to really focus on year 11 attendance the first week back, because research has showed that if you can get it right that first week, it's going to be much better all the way through. And our analysis of year 11 attendance shows that it led to a 5% increase in attendance over that period, which is significant. So we're repeating that again this Easter. And if it works again, then we're going to put that kind of strategy through other year groups. So schools say the year groups that they have the biggest issues with, and we're going to move it forward through that. So that's really proactive. It's been a pleasure to be able to do that, and it's been even more of a pleasure that it had such impact. Big thanks to the Isle of Wight's inclusion team for working so hard together with us in school improvement on that. So next steps, we continue to focus on attendance. We continue our school improvement work, raising attainment work. We focus on high quality inclusive teaching, which ties in exactly with both the magic wand aspirations of my colleague on the right and also with the safety valve programme coming up. Karen and I, one of our colleagues, has written 2 really important documents around this, the 20 strands and SEN support guidelines, which we're using to inform our work, and it's available to all school leaders and well used by them actually. So lots happening at the moment and lots in process to happen along with the safety valve. Questions?
Thank you, Natalie. I mean, we all know there is a lot of work to do, but what is very encouraging is you've done a lot of work on the amount of work there is to do. So thank you for that. So questions from the committee? If there's none, you've done a good job, Natalie.
Someone's got to give me a really hard
Any
question.
questions? I think, again, I would just ask you, what would your magic wand request be? Because it's there is always something more, and that isn't to say the amount of work you put in isn't good enough, because this is a phenomenal amount of work. But what would be your magic wand request?
It would be for there to be a collective belief amongst head teachers that it is possible for all of their children to get to those all important age-related expectations, and to use the support available to them, not just ours, peer support, really well in pursuit of that, without losing the caring ethos that currently pervades in schools and is so important. And it is possible to have both. That would be my magic wand.
So thank you. I think that's a very laudable magic wand request. What's stopping that at the moment? What do you see as the biggest barriers to that?
I think there's some very discouraged people. There's some people that have been in post for a long time and have really fixed mindsets. It's very difficult to change their mindsets. But I would say that there are more heads that really understand that it is possible and are listening and looking and learning. There's been a small kind of bias at times towards heads and schools that have done really well, but I think it comes out of fear, and we've got to move that so that everyone is learning from what's happening in the strongest schools.
Thank you, Brian.
One of the bits I'd also like to add in is the impact of the pandemic. I know Natalie's talked about that in relation to children, but I think it's also important in relation to teachers and support staff as well. And actually, during that pandemic, I think that did affect people's well-being. And the same way that children are reconstructing their approach to life post-pandemic, we've also got teachers in that space as well. And that's particularly challenging this, where they've seen loss because of the pandemic. That gave them a different perspective on the pandemic. Actually, people were scared in some communities if you'd lost your grandma or a close relative and so on. And it's how we get the well-being for teachers right. So I think that's massively important for head teachers to focus on teacher and support staff well-being as we kind of move forward.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think well-being of teaching staff is going to be key to retention and recruitment. Any other questions? Oh, wow, it's unbelievable. Thank you. So moving on then, committee's work plan. Oh, you've all had a chance to have a little look, see if there's anything you want to add, move around or change. There's only one thing I've seen come up, well, I say me, Paul mentioned it to me, is I won't take credit for something I haven't done, is the closure of the YMCA nursery. I'm not sure whether that falls under the remit of this committee or indeed your portfolio, Councillor Andrew, but is it something we need to look at? Is it some sort of action that needs taking? Not that particular closure, but in terms of provision of nursery school places.
I think, as you're aware, Chair, that there is a paper coming forward on the early years sufficiency strategy, which I think will answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the work plan? No, good. You've done a good job, Paul and Mel. Thank you for that. So on to members' questions. Any questions that you haven't already asked? Apart from what Brian's going to do with retirement. This is Brian's last meeting, everyone. So I would just personally like to thank, you might not realise it, but Brian's been a massive help to me in doing this role over the last 2 years. So a personal thanks, Brian, and also a personal wish that whatever you do decide to do, you have a fantastic amount of fun doing it. So thank you.
I do apologise for interrupting, Chair. I'd like to thank Brian as well, because he talks common sense in plain English. And thank you very much, Brian. I wish you all best for your retirement.
Do you mind if I just say big thank you to Policy and Scrutiny Committee? I think it's really important to me that I'm held to account as an officer. And I've spent a decade now being an Isle of Wight officer in the education wing, and I've always felt appropriately supported, but also appropriately challenged in this. And you know, Rodney, just to say something to you personally, there have been times where you've said to me, I'm not sure, I can't get my questions right. Yours have been some of the most searching and thorough questions, actually. They've been really good questions that have made me think. So the work of the committee and holding people to account, I think, is second to none. And it's why I really wanted to do that presentation at the beginning, because I'm really keen that you hold whoever my successor is, their feet to the fire around that SEN agenda, because we've got to get that right for children on the island. It's really important. But yeah, thank you very much. And I'm off to be put out to pasture as an old donkey given a carrot or something.
Well, thank you all. And again, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Councillor Andre. Thanks, Steve, on my behalf. You'll probably see him on the ferry. We'll beat him there, Natalie, to be honest. So yes, you're free to go.